In this module, we're going to look at capturing your actions. What we're going to be doing in the capture section is to collect evidence of what you are already doing to improve or affect each lever. The reason we're going to do this is that we need to create or record a baseline. We need to know where we are starting from. So there's no point in us rushing off trying to create new activities to grow things by 10% if we don't know what we're already doing. When we know what we're already doing, we may easily identify some quick wins, some things that we can do now to improve the levers without implementing anything new. So that's quite an important starting point. The other reason why we're going to create this baseline is that the activities and actions that we're taking right now will inform the next step, which is calculate. When we have a track of all the activities that we're doing, then we know exactly what we've got to measure in the next step. What you're going to do in this module is to work through each lever in turn and capture all of the activities that you're currently doing to improve that lever. Now, you can refer back to the list that you created when you did your clarify step of what actually each lever represents, just to make sure you're capturing the right thing in the right place. And this step, just like clarify, capture is something that you only do or should only need to do once per business unit or product line or whatever, once per frame that you set in setting your frame. Anything new that you do, any new growth activities that you want to take, we're going to track those differently, and we'll look at that in the profit growth course. So you're only going to go through this exercise once. It's quite a large undertaking when you do it the first time, but once you've done it, it's well worth the effort. In the rest of this module, we've provided you with lots of tools, tips and examples about what to capture, how to capture it, and even how to store it. And we've provided you some tools to make it easier to do that as well. Before we dive into capturing your actions and recording all that material, I just wanted to give you some tips just that generally cover the kind of things you're going to be doing and some guidelines to help you along. So the first one, and this is quite important, is to capture activities not just that you're doing right now, but any from the recent past as well. And the reason for this is that if you stop doing them, you might want to find out why. And the reason is very often that they gave you what you thought at the time were low returns. Now, if those activities weren't that big an undertaking, didn't require that much to make them run, but were giving you 7, 8, 9 or 10% of a return on a lever, well, 10% is all we want. So it may be worth reinstating those activities if it doesn't take too much effort. So it's well worth a look back to see things that you've done in the past. Don't go mad. Don't go back, a long time. But if you can think of anything or anything stands out that you might have done in the past, then definitely look at that and look at why you stopped doing it. It may be that you stopped doing it just because somebody forgot to keep doing it. Maybe you've got an A board that you did in the past that you still have printed and ready to go. It just doesn't get put out in front of the store in the morning. It may be something more involved. But do look for those past and present activities. Another thing that you can do, if it's relevant to you, is to do something that we call identifying your channels. Now, channels are different groups of activities within a lever. And if you define these when you're capturing, then it will help you with your measurement when you do calculation as well. And later, when you move on to profit growth, it helps you more closely identify opportunities for growth. So some examples of this would be in your suspects lever. You might have different places that you go to generate traffic, to raise awareness. You might do print ads, you might do online advertising, you might do radio advertising, you might do any kind of thing to increase the number of suspects. So before you actually start capturing, or while you're capturing, if you see that there are groups of things, you might want to start defining these groups. Similarly, In your prospects, you might have different ways to influence the micro commitments that people make. You might be trying different things in different places in the store, for example. There may be different steps your staff are taking. Similarly, conversions, there may be different places that you encourage people to buy. One of the most common ones in most businesses is in margins, where you have different cost areas or different groups of costs. And when we talked in Clarify about margins and about defining the areas in which your margins were affected, that's definitely a place where you probably want to break down when you're measuring what you're doing in this step. So for capture what you're doing to address each one of those areas, but then in calculate, you're going to want to measure those separately as well. So this idea of identifying your channels just helps you generate more usable data later on. You don't need to do this in the context of Profit Foundation, in the context of performing this health check on your business, because really what you're just trying to do is get a baseline, see where you're at, see where the gaps are, see where the easy wins are. But when you move on to profit growth, you're definitely going to want to have done this work. So you might want to do it now. Another thing to do as you're working through is, as always, to look for gaps. And when you're capturing activities, this is the first place you're going to start seeing gaps. These are places where things aren't quite as you were expecting or aren't quite as they should be. And I'd just like to highlight this idea of a gap and what defines a gap and what doesn't define a gap. Because a gap is something that we can address in the correct stage of the process, but there are some things that we won't want to address there because they need more work, so we're going to have to move them out and put in the effort in the create step, which is addressed in the profit growth course. But within this course, we're going to talk later on about correcting things. So we need to find things that are easily fixed, and those things are usually things that we've already done the work of setting them up. They're just not working as expected. Some things that you can look for as you're capturing is something that you either aren't currently implementing properly or that's stopped working the way that you were expecting. Now, this is something that you might not notice immediately here, but when you go on to calculate, this is going to really stand out. You're going to see the figures aren't quite up to scratch. So we'll address this again in calculate. But one of the things that will stand out during capture as a gap is a technique that you stopped using. Remember I said to capture activities past and present. So if you were using a technique and you stopped using it, that's very often an opportunity where something just slipped off the radar for one reason or another, and you can very easily and quickly put it back in for a quick win. Now we actually have classifications for issues that we find as we're working through the 7 levers. And that tool we call the 4 Bs. I'm going to talk about this more in the correct module because that's where it's most important. What we're doing right now is looking for issues, but out of interest, you might be interested to know that the types of gaps that I just described, poor implementation, something that stopped working, something where we stopped using a technique, that's something we classify as broken, which is one of the 4 Bs, and that's something that we can correct. But there are other things that we can't correct that need more work. So let's look at some of those. Things that are not a gap. Well, that's something that you haven't previously defined or where you weren't doing anything at all. So if you find a lever, and these very often are the same thing, if you find a lever that you weren't previously hadn't identified, and prospects is very often a lever that people haven't previously defined, then you're unlikely to be doing anything to improve your prospects lever. And this is something that we call a blank, another one of the 4 Bs. If you've got a blank, then it's going to take a lot more work to put something new completely from scratch in place. So that's going to move on to the create step, which is handled in profit growth. So blanks, we can make a note somewhere, but we're not going to handle it incorrect. Similarly, as you're going through, the other thing that's going to happen is you're going to see something that you might already be doing or something that you could be doing that is an improvement on the way things are right now. Again, that's more work than we're really looking for in the correct stage. So that's something we call better, another B. And in better, again, that's something that we need to create for, so we need that to move over to profit growth. So we're looking for gaps where things are broken, but we're not looking for things where we're blank or things where we think we can do it better. Not right now. To guide you through the steps of capture, I've created a capture techniques lesson, which gives you a general overview of how to capture different types of activities. There's not one capture lesson per lever because it's not possible to do that. The way that capture works is that you just need to go through each lever and capture whatever it is that you're doing. You could be doing so many different things that we just have to generalize. So go and look at the capture techniques lesson, and as you work through your levers, use the capture worksheet, a tool that we've provided, to record what you find. In this lesson, I just want to go through some of the general types of things you might be trying to capture as you step through your 7 levers, and how you might actually capture that information that's in that particular format. This is not specific to any given lever. You might have things in these formats in any one of the 7 levers. So this is just a general lesson to give you some guidelines on how to go about capturing the information. So the first thing that you might want to capture would be physical documents. Things that are physical records of things. They might be things that you have had printed. They might be flyers and promotional materials. They might be an advert in a magazine or a newspaper, or your listing in the yellow pages. They may be instructions that you give to staff, training, anything that is already in physical form that you don't have in any other format, or you might print it out yourself from another format. Whatever it might be, one thing you could do is get it in that printed format or photocopy it so you've got a physical piece of paper. Or you might want to prefer to turn it into an electronic format by simply taking a photograph of it using your phone, which is now a pretty common thing to be able to do. It doesn't need to be super high fidelity, but you do need to be able to read the thing when you reference back to it. So either print it out, photocopy it, or take a photograph to turn it into an electronic format. I could say use a scanner, but pretty much everybody's got a phone with a camera on it. Not everybody's got a scanner. So because we don't need it to be perfect, taking a photo with your phone is fine. If you do have these things in electronic format, whether it's an email or the electronic original of that document that you had created in whatever format, if you can, again, if you want it in physical, tangible form, you could print it out. The other thing you could do is copy and paste the text or whatever it is into one central electronic format document. Now, we're going to talk about storing these things, by the way, in a separate lesson about storage techniques. So where that document might be, we'll come back to. And finally, it's very possible that in some cases, some things that you might do or have done might just be verbal only. A phone call you made or some training that you give to your staff. They still need to be captured in the format of I tell my people, or I made a call, or I did this, or I did that. And so what you need to do is draw or write out what it is that you did or do. And then you can file that as is if you draw it on paper. And again, just like any other physical document, you could take a photograph with your phone just to record it. Yes, obviously, if you have the means to do it, you could draw it or write it electronically and store that in that central electronic format. But the point here is that if you have some verbal instructions, training, or something like that, that you need to draw or write it out. As I said, look at the storage techniques lesson for specific tips on how to store what you capture as you go along.